So I'm going to turn it over now to our leader, Curt Collier. Curt Collier has been an ordained and certified leader in the ethical culture movement for more than 20 years, serving in one capacity or another at 5 different societies, including New York, Riverdale, Yonkers, and now, of course, here at Bergen. Immediately prior to his service here, he was National Youth Programs Director for the National Park Service, where he coordinated with Groundworks USA to provide jobs, training, and opportunity for at-risk youth across the country, restoring our national parks. Without further ado, I give you Curt Collier, What Happened to Civil Engagement in America and Why That Matters.
And I'm very happy that we have Eric Sandhusen right now as our president, that you bring a lot of energy, you put a lot of commitment into this community, you do a lot of work for us, and it's always, I'm always impressed by, he calls me 2 or 3 times a week, and it's always nice to, it's always great because
for advice.
We like to talk about things and we like to go through things, and it's nice that he cares so much about this community and puts in so much work. So thank you, Eric, also. Yeah. I got called to be a guest speaker at another organization the other night, and I was there on Zoom, and these very interesting organization. These are people who are working on light pollution in the United States, or particularly in New Jersey. And they had a little meeting, all this kind of stuff, and then they went through their list of woes, which I thought was interesting. And of course, the biggest woe is, where is everybody? They can't get volunteers out, people aren't showing up at the libraries, all these things are happening, and then they just kind of looked at me and like, man, I just had 9 conversations this week with other organizations about that as well. I still do consult with the National Park Service on a regular basis. I've tried to help them out raising, getting more communities involved and all this good stuff. And the partners I work with say the same thing. I hear that from the Library Association. I hear that from Martin Luther King Committee that we went to. I heard that from BCLA, who can't even get enough people to table at the upcoming Pride festivals and is worried how they're going to meet that. I hear this again and again and again. I hear that from clergy, other congregations. Things are definitely, times are changing. That's a great song. You hit it on the head about that. And I think about this all the time. First of all, my salary depends upon that. The second is that people call me all the time and they say to me, where is everybody? And what are we doing? And I was the National Youth Program Director, worked with a lot of different states. I consult still with the Ethical Culture Society, fly to California and work with them. So I'm a busy little beaver. And I hear the same refrain over and over and over and over and over again as what happened to civic engagement in America. Where is everybody? You're here, right? You have been here consistently, most of you, throughout the entire year, but we're not seeing large numbers of people walk in the door. And what the mistake that most groups do is they suddenly start blaming themselves. We didn't do this right, if you did this differently, and I'm going, well, if all of that was true, and maybe a little of that is merited, of course, and you always need to be asking what you're doing and how you're doing it. But what about the church down the street that just closed its doors, or the Catholic church here in town that just closed its door, or the synagogue that can't even get enough young adults to participate in a bar mitzvah class that they had to bring in 4 congregations, or the Unitarian 400-person Unitarian church that just closed its doors? What about all of these other groups, depending on if they're women's groups or men's groups or they're LGBT groups or they're predominantly working with black communities or the Hispanic community? If all of them are dwindling, for us to say, what are we doing wrong, I think somehow misses the question, right? It's maybe there's part of that. There's always a piece of truth in there, but it's also going, man, what's happened to civic engagement in America? How many of you have belonged to organizations where membership has significantly dropped over the last 10 to 15 years especially? Yeah, I mean, you go, man, where is everybody, right? I hear this all the time from groups. And so I kind of want to give you my take on it a little bit, and know that we have to, David is up there, has got a big hook, and he's going to cut me off if we go too long because we have a meeting right after this to talk about our community. But I just want to kind of use an example. So I sucked at math in high school. and struggled with it through college until I got to my master's. And in master's, they said, well, you have to take a couple of classes in statistics. I ended up taking 3 classes in statistics. Loved it. I finally found the one math I love. And I use statistics a lot. If you read my stuff, I'm usually throwing in statistical numbers because I'm playing with numbers all the time. And it's kind of, it's based on something called the mini model theory, in which you look at things through several different lenses and trying to figure out kind of what you're looking at. So I'm going to show you an interesting phenomenon of people like me and Rob, who are from South Texas. He's from North Texas, I'm from South Texas, so there may be a little difference here in the amount of horsepower per car for young men. This is a very interesting phenomenon. If you grow in places where I'm from, where young men like to have big cars, and that's how big is the engine getting based on the age, which is a very, very interesting phenomenon. In fact, if you track it, and I've actually looked up some data on this, young men around 17, the horsepower is somewhere around only like 150 horsepower, and then it kind of jumps up at 18. It significantly goes up around 19, and but 20 and 21 it kind of holds steady, and then by 22 it starts to go up again and starts to get higher and higher. So we can almost track how much horsepower young men want in their cars in South Texas, especially in those years, based on something like this. Now, this is not linear. Linear would be exactly a straight line. This is nonlinear, which is kind of a fun way of looking at statistics, because the problem with humans is we're nonlinear. Right? If I were saying how much water you give a plant based on how tall that plant gets, it's a pretty linear function. If I were to say, even for some human activities, like the amount of money in your bank and the amount of money you blow probably on tickets to, Beyonce concerts, we could probably predict those things as well. But most things with human behaviors are not quite straight. So why when young men, and by the way, in Texas, I got my driver's license at 15, right? So that's allowed in rural Texas. But really around 17, why do you think the horsepower is only usually around 150 horse?
That's because they can't afford anything more than that.
So the first thing is affordability, right? You put that out there. But why specifically a low horsepower car if their first car? Where does their first car usually come from? Mom! Mom's car. Mom is less interested in having a 450 horsepower car, right? So they're driving mom's car until they get a little bit, and suddenly it starts to jump up. Why would you explain the change in that? What happened for these young men, perhaps in this age range? Jobs. They got their first sets of jobs, and just like all my friends, we all cherried out our cars, put hook 'em headers, twice pipes, all the things you did with your cars, right? Right? Turbo boosters and all the kind of stuff, and you probably raised it up and put on this heavier gear, right? You did all that, and then you start doing that. Why does it kind of level out through the early 20s? They're in college. Very good. Because they're probably in school or vocational tech or college or something like that. They can't afford to get a much more expensive car. But then after that, it really, really jumps up to they're almost getting these muscle cars of 450. You see young men all through even Teaneck and Bogota rushing around in these very powerful engine cars. What changed here? They got better jobs, right? They're no longer mowing grass. They got really their first career jobs. And the first thing they do is they go out and buy big muscle cars. I lived on military bases around military men, and you see that all the time. They come in driving a Prius, and they leave driving a turbo, something like that stuff, right? Because what other pressures are on young men at these ages? Why are they driving muscle cars? Girlfriends and status, right? How do you spell girl? G-I-R-L, friends. and status and yada, 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 yada. And that continues on until you see them around 25 years of age. Next time you pull up a light, you're going to hear, brr, 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 brr. Right next to you, this car is going to be a young man sitting there, right? And he's going to be kind of driving like this. And you could hear the horsepower of that massive engine in that car, which is way more than anyone ever needs. But there you go. Now, but let's kind of now change the age ranges for just a second. I had a piece of paper towel. Can someone give me a paper towel real quick? I'm sorry. Let's change the ages a little bit. And instead of up to 22, thanks, but Susan, thank you for getting that. We were up to 22. Let's do 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 when your life comes to an end. And then if we do the same thing, we would see that they're around age 26 are still driving muscle cars. We still hear them when we pull up to stoplights with these powerful engines. And then, but it certainly starts to drop a little bit. And then by the age of 29, it drops quite a bit. And then they're back down to kind of here. Oops, sorry. So once again, what's changed there? Why is it that if it was a linear, the more money they have, obviously the more powerful cars they get, but what's changed? They had, right, they got married. They got married, and this may have been happening right around here, and then what follows sometimes marriage? Children, and then what does usually the more reasonable, mature part of that relationship say, do we really need a Ford turbocharged, a car? What we really need is a minivan or something like that. And begrudgingly, finally, that thing gets sold to some other 19-year-old, 20-year-old boy, and it kind of continues on. In fact, it drops way down to about, a typical minivan around 200 horse. Why does it drop to that? For lots of other reasons, right? So the thing about humans is we're not linear. We actually we respond to all kinds of other pressures. So if we're linear, we can make predictions. And that's the hard thing when you're doing statistics with humans is linear regression analysis doesn't work. Linear meaning like a straight line. We need a kind of a non-linear because all these things start to come in there, multiple various coming in, which impact our decision making, which are hard to predict. Now you just got your first degree in economics, congratulations. Because predicting human behavior is really difficult. So let's try this again. In 1990, about 76% of Americans belonged to congregations. What do they say is probably how many percentage of Americans belong to congregations today? 33%, right. And it's not linear, by the way, because there's a bump around the Reagan years, there's another one around the Bush years, there's another little bump around Trump's years, which is interesting. Why do you think church membership goes up when, for hope, right? Or to come together, or feeling besieged, you come back to your synagogue, you come back to your Unitarian church, you come back to your ethical society because you're feeling besieged and things like that, so there's some bumps. The liberals start praying and this kind of stuff. But so this is an interesting thing. So now you could do an analysis of young men and horsepower. Why this drop? Why aren't Americans joining congregations anymore? 33%, 17% of Americans are attending a church service right now. That's it, nationwide, 17%. Yes? The COVID epidemic affect that. COVID caused a big drop, right? Because now a lot of older adults didn't feel right. It caused a big drop, but then you would think afterwards it would go back up again, but it didn't. And all of your social action groups too, right? They didn't come back. They didn't come back to choruses. They didn't come back to study groups and book groups and all this kind of stuff. The people didn't come back. So COVID, it certainly had a big impact. But then when they opened the doors back up and started, I think people disappeared. There you go. Yeah, I should remind me. I'm gonna let you. You might. No, here we go. Eric will do that. Yeah, you have a job. So, technology. But would that explain why people wouldn't join even the evangelical church, the Lutheran church, or Temple of Bethel or whatever? People are disappearing in large numbers. What's the reason why? We could predict it for muscle cars, yeah.
I was thinking also habit to some extent. During COVID, one adjusted to a different way of living.
Correct. But this drop has been going on 1990, 95, 2000, all the way before that. It's been going on for quite a long time. And not just in congregations, but other things. So yeah, COVID certainly did play a role of that, but only in the last few years. Yes?
I think that young parents, like my son's age group, they dedicate the whole weekend for the extracurricular activities for their children, taking this one to dance recital, that one to baseball, wrestling, volleyball. I have to make an appointment with my grandchildren nowadays.
We can't hear the person speaking.
Yeah, we'll turn that microphone up just a bit more. She says, Apana says, I had to make an appointment with my grandchildren because there's so much going on. And that's true certainly nationwide too, right? I mean, the explosion of after-school programs, but which begs the question is, why would any group of parents allow a sports activity to occur on a Sunday morning or Friday night if they know things that have to happen? Yeah, back to Apana one more second.
For the future, like to getting into a good school in the future, that's the extracurricular activity, always counts.
That's right.
That's one of the big things.
And that is a big thing is people are looking for other enrichment activities. So that other enrichment activities, why do you think the Christians have seen such a massive drop in their participation? Right? Some people, right, say that one more time.
I'm not Catholic because I started thinking.
So Marion Claxton puts up something interesting is that a lot of people seem to have started thinking. That could have counted for certainly the drop in religiosity. But for a lot of people, when they survey young adults, they go, man, I hate Christian politics, it sucks. Anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-inclusion, anti-diversity, and all of this stuff. And it seems that the more vocal that other side gets, the more that we do not feel welcome even in our own churches. So politics, they say, has played a great big role in that, right? And that, you think about it, who has the biggest voice out there tends to be these very powerful conservative organizations who say that this is what's Christianity. How many of you caught that kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs? Did you hear his speech? How many of you heard the speech or saw it or heard about it? So a speaker, the kicker for Kansas City Chief, with Kelty and all that whole group, he gave a talk before a graduation commencement speech to a fairly conservative Catholic thing. He says, congratulations to all your women. Congratulations for graduating because now you realize you can move on to your most important thing, which is having children and following your husband. And don't be, what he also said, I'm paraphrasing, but don't also be pulled away by the hellish culture of those gays who are out to destroy us and all of the things on there. This was a talk he gave. It's raging on the internet how many people said, oh yeah, he's so right. Yeah. And then I'm reading the kind of notes from different people as part of this talk, and how many people said, that's why I left the church. That is why I left the church. Because one thing that happened around 1980s, 1990s is the birth of the moral majority, the amount of money that they had, and then they started saying that this is what Christianity and Christians left the church. But then why did Jews leave the synagogue? Right? Why do other people leave their groups? It just can't be explained merely by these one things, and this is kind of the challenge on there. So this is kind of the where we are now. Robert Putnam wrote a very, very famous book. If you're ever going to talk about this subject, you have to know his book because everybody's going to reference Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. He wrote the book in 2000. And he said, what happened to all the bowling leagues, Moose, Elk, Rotary, Knights of Columbus, VFW halls, women's, women who get together and help with voting rights? League of Women Voters. What happened to NOW? What happened to all these organizations? They all started disappearing rapidly in numbers. And he studied the book in the year 2000. And he says the mystery concerns the strange disappearance of social capital and civic engagement in America. This is the year 2000 this book came along. By social capital, I mean the features of social life, networks, norms, and trust that enable participants to act together more effectively. In fact, in the year 2000, he predicted that only the groups that are making people stay connected, right, and participating and engaged, he predicted that within 25 years, those people would have more power than their numbers say, right? Conservatives. Conservatives, which only represent 15 to 20, 17% of the U.S. population, now have tremendous influence in this country because when liberal parents, you people, were telling your kids to go out, live your own life, find your own way, find your own bliss, do your own thing, tune on, turn out, and drop out, right? Other people are saying, hell no, you're not going to do that. You're coming with me to Sunday morning church. You're helping at the family the picnic, you're going to do those things. And Putnam says, well, if I look, this group is still connected, has their talking points, their game, still raising money, still donating to the church, and this group is saying, we don't need those things, those were impressive. He says in 25 years, this group will have more political influence than this group, which is what we're seeing today, right? So we're exactly seeing that. Now, at the same time that he wrote his book, in fact, a little bit before that, Robert Bella, he was a famous sociologist at University of California in Berkeley, wrote his book called Habits of the Heart. And a lot of people have read that book. So if you ever read just 2 books and you want to know everything up to date, till year 2000, read Habits of the Heart and Bowling Alone. And he basically says, yeah, something is happening, but the problem is we need communities. Democracies, communities, and organizations matter. Democracy, he writes, depends on citizens' participation. When citizens are engaged, they can exchange ideas, invest in finding solutions, and employ civilized discourse, that never worked out, to address the issues facing their communities. This strengthens our democracy and also breeds personal empowerment on an individual level by helping people feel that they have a say in what goes on in their communities, by uniting people in a shared purpose. So he even said, this is so great. Democracies need civic engagement. We have to get along. We have to kind of continue to participate. And is it a problem that people are no longer participating in the same levels? And they all say, definitely so. So let's talk about some ways that that's kind of impacting us. The first is, as we talked about, is volunteer rates. What percentage of Americans volunteer on an annual basis? Organized, not you showing up at your Radio Shack to take back your batteries, which is hysteric because they're closed. But actually showing up at an organized event. What percentage of Americans do you think still show up for those kinds of stuff? It's 23%. It's dropped to 23% of Americans are actually, you ask Americans, like, do you volunteer? They go, yes, I recycle my garbage. And you listen to them and go, you did this on your own, you did this on your own, you did this on your own. Did you do any civic engagement type of stuff? And that number's pretty close. What's the volunteer rate according to the study that just came out? What's the volunteer rate in New Jersey? 16%. 16% of a New Jerseyans participating in, and those who participate, you're here in the room, by the way. And this is formal volunteering, I want to say. 53% of Americans still give donations. People still do, personal type of things. They are doing more. I'm going to do this because I think it's the right thing to do. But that's not the same thing as civic engagement, coming together with a group and do that. Who's most likely to volunteer, men or women? Women. Single people or married people? Married people, very good. People with higher education or people just with a college education? Higher education, right. So you can make these predictions. The question is why? Why do married women who volunteer at larger numbers than other people with usually college degrees and things like that. Huh? PTA, right. There's a good one where people actually do volunteer and kind of stuff like that. So congregations are not doing any better. I told you 17% are probably attending something on Sunday morning. 33% are joining. When they did a survey, who has full confidence anymore? They surveyed thousands of Americans. Who has full confidence that religion is good for American? 10% agreed. 10% think religion is good. Do you think religion is good for America? Yeah, I think you're in the 90% are going, well, it depends on the religion, right? But in general, do you think religion's been good for America? Yeah, not so much. 80% of you don't trust religious leaders. It's higher in ethical societies, I may say, but yeah, 80% of Americans don't trust. Do you trust, the minister down your street that he's looking in the best interest for you and your family? Probably not, right? And 4,500 Protestant churches closed in 2019. The last year the data was collected, and only 3,000 opened. So churches are dropping. They expect within the next decade for 100,000 churches to close in America because usually people can't afford to keep them going and those kinds of stuff. So why is this happening, right? This is the thing that comes to all of us, people to me. This is when I sit in the conferences and listen to people and read all the magazines and the research and do all this kind of stuff and participate in group dynamics. Why did it happen? And the usual, this is what Robert Putnam said back in the year 2000. And I think it's a pretty good list, but I think he means busyness and time pressure. Right? People were much more busier. It used to be that, people had just had a very shorter work week and then they came home and then they would volunteer on the end. Economically, things have gotten much more difficult. And that is probably a great big thing. People are just trying to make ends meet, right? Families back in the 1990s, someone could still work, afford a house and a car. People in New Jersey can't afford their own homes anymore. The new families, your kids are out there looking for a place to live and to figure out that if they're not already still living in your basement because they cannot afford to live anywhere. And it's super, super expensive. Suburbanization, he said, was a cause of that. I don't believe that because, suburbanites do that. The movement of women into the paid labor force, definitely, right? Gone are all those church ladies who used to, be there when you were kids in droves and in massive numbers and it did all the volunteering maybe at your congregations when you were young, those kind of stuff. But also disruption of marriage and family ties. If more married people volunteer than unmarried people, then if you have more single mothers and working families and, divorced families and things like that, that could drop. His other big thing was the 60s. All right, that was a big thing. Everything from Vietnam, Watergate, illicit drugs, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and all that kind of stuff. Because because progressive parents were saying to their kids, you know what, go do your own thing. It's true. I don't want you to live in the same oppressive environment I was raised in. You don't need to join the church. You don't have to do this kind of stuff. Go find your own way. And they all went out and bought Sub-Zero refrigerators and all the other kind of stuff. I blame you, boomers. No. And those kind of stuff. So that was his thing. Robert Bella, who in his book was trying to figure that out, he says, what's the rise of rampant individualism in America? That we have this myth in this country of the self-made man who can pull himself by his own bootstraps and do all this kind of stuff, when the reality is we are much more connected and needed of other people. And there's this kind of idea of self-reliance. Look at all these TV shows where people are trying to figure out, how can I live underground in case, the zombie apocalypse or the liberals take over? How long can I live off the grid? And did y'all see, anyone see Doomsday Preppers TV show? Of course not. You didn't. I watched the damn thing because I'd watch these people, okay, and they would do this, and then some experts would go and they go, yes, you're going to live probably 6 more months. And it happened again and again and again. And I wondered if that was the point of the show, was to pour these doomsday preppers that you cannot survive without other people out there in the community. Most recently, Annette Strauss, Institute for Civic Life, said it's a lack of civility in the United States. Civility is plummeting. I wonder if that's the cause or if that's the effect. That's an interesting question. How many of you think it's the cause Or how many think that may be an effect of a lack of civility? Something has changed. I think the internet has made it where we can sit there at night and say, you're a buffoon, and here's a picture of you looking like Karl Marx and all this kind of stuff. And that garbage that gets thrown upon our attention. They also say it's a lack of attention to public affairs. What percentage of Americans cannot name the 3 branches of our government? It's actually almost 40%. 40% if you ask them, could do it. But if you ask them, what's going on? How many of you think that your young children are tuned off from anything about Trump or his arrest or his indictment? Not you, because you're watching it. You're going to go home and watch it. I'm talking about your kids and your grandkids. Are they watching that stuff? They're not. They're really not. People have kind of tuned out that. And in fact, I had a certain young person tell me, is there a war going on in Israel? Yeah, I think so. I've heard something about it. But the SOS, they suggest, is a lack of role models, and that's true. That if you didn't belong to a congregation, perhaps if there was no kind of role model of that, 64% of millennials, that's people who would have young children today, 64% of them never went to a Sunday school themselves. Think of that. 64% of parents never attended a Sunday school or Hebrew school themselves. So you say, you should value this, and they go, why? Should I value that? I don't understand why I should value that. I didn't grow up with that. My parents didn't think it was important, right? So these old kind of stuff. But the other thing is that maybe because civics is down, only 9 states in the District of Columbia rely 1 year of U.S. government or civics. How many of you took 1 year of civics and governments when you were in high school? Yeah, it was almost mandatory, by the way. 30 states required half a year, and 11 states have no civic or government requirements in order to graduate. 11 states in the United States are not training their kids what is our government, how it works, what is civics. Think of that, 11 states, right? That's like half of America. I told you I was bad at math. So, so it's a big thing. So is there some hope? And the answer is yes. But by the way, when they did a recent survey, 95% of Americans still think that civic engagement is a good thing. 95%. They asked people, they said, do you think we should be more involved and connected? 95% of people could do it. Gen X, which is a lot of you, how many of you were born between the year 1965 and 1980? There you go, one of them. Are more likely to donate money as long as they can do it online and clearly see digitally how their money makes a difference. Right? They will donate to organizations. They're sitting at home. They're not quite the digital natives, but they're getting close to it. They're sitting on their computers at night, reading organizations, going, that sounds interesting, I'll support that, and sending that money there. So they're still giving money to that. Gen C, which are those born 1995 and after that, are more focused on environment and the education. They'll spend a lot of money on that. And what's great for most of us is their numbers of involvement and volunteer rates are outpacing previous generations. So the youngest men of that. So does this matter? Does the drop, let's forget the economics of our ethical society for a second. Why does civic, and maybe you can help with that microphone. Is this a problem? Is this worrying to you? What do you think about this, with the stuff I just threw out there? And including online. Sylvia.
So I'm a school teacher. I have been for about 40 years, and the change in the students as far as interacting with one another is just, it's interesting to me, but it's also troubling to me because they don't seem to be able to communicate what it is that they're actually thinking.
Yeah.
And if they can't do that with each other, what is their interest going to be in trying to delve into the harder topics of, like, as they get older, reading something and being able to think critically about it? They're not that interested in it.
Yeah.
And because they're getting that immediate gratification from their little digital games, which they're on way too much and at a way too early age. How many of you have seen toddlers sitting silently at a table in the restaurant?
Doing this.
Exactly. Their brains are circuited from a very young age to pay attention for this long, this long, this long, and that's it. So to try to get them to think critically in school is a huge challenge.
Yep. And I've heard this from multiple school teachers. My boat's been out of the water for repairs. I've been staying with my sister-in-law, who's a school teacher, and every day she comes into work complaining. And I hear this from other school teachers as well. I heard it from Sam, Samantha. All of our practically Sunday school parents are teachers, and they're all going, well, heck, what's going on? We're hearing this again and again and again, right, that something is rapidly changing. And so if they're not civically engaged, or if everything they get is fed to them and filtered in the last talk I got and really just crafted for right them, what kind of really discernment are they getting and thinking about critically about the world? Yeah.
Two little anecdotes. One is that in my town, which I grant you, I don't know how many people, it's between 4,000 and 6,000, I think, in my town. We just had an election for our council. 2 people are within 2 votes of each other. And out of the 4,000 or 6,000 people who could vote, 629
Yep.
voted. To me, that's the kind of thing that I wish they would teach in school, because I think that is really mind-boggling,
Yep.
that that small a group of people
29% of Americans vote.
are going to determine how your town is run. And the other was when I was working, a younger person than I am was interviewing someone for a job in the office. And after that person left, the person in the office came out and said, that person couldn't communicate. This was a college graduate, a recent college graduate, and did not know how to engage in conversation. Very scary.
Yes, in fact, there are a lot of interesting college courses you can take now. One of them is how to answer the telephone. Because most people, they should make it 4 credits. Most people text, right? My own family, they'll text me like, okay, I'm upstairs. You could just, I could get that maybe, but yeah. How to answer the phone, how to write a business letter, right? Remember, that used to be very important and taught and all this kind of stuff, like how to write a letter, instead of like, okay, LMAO, ROFL, IMHO, right? So, yeah, Orion.
I'm curious if you've read anything that indicates that online engagement, like social media, may be perceived as being an alternative to civic engagement.
So, yes, the answer is that we don't have enough data to that, supposedly, because really the phenomenon of being online has exploded with TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, all these things, which operates for many people as a sense of community, until one of them wrote in her blog that I believed I had a community until I was sick and needed someone to take my dog for a walk. And then her 1,000 something Facebook friends suddenly disappeared to 0, and she couldn't get anybody. And she said that was a big eye-opener to me, what other people are saying about the importance of community. So yes, they have a community until you need that community, and then are they going to help you? Are they going to show up if someone passes away? Are they going to help with, with all the things that we need other people for? Anyone online, by the way, David? They get to sleep.
No one online at this time.
Okay. So I think it does matter. I think it matters for lots of reasons. People are healthier in communities. People are more mentally stable in communities. People live longer who are active in communities. Democracies are stronger in communities. There are many, 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 many reasons why community is important. For me, the two big things that I've read as an antidote to perhaps to this is the first is that civic engagement, that you need to build the side of civic engagement. The only way that they will come is actually if you put the activities together, and people will show that. You need to become a center of all kinds of civic engagement, right? That's what we are at the Ethical Society. We're a community where people come together and do all kinds of things at a given week, and all kinds of kind of entryways into that. It may not be just Sunday morning. We had a whole group of people who were here this morning who planted a garden and then left to go feed their kids or whatever they're doing stuff. We have people who showed up at the open mic night the other night who participate in the life of this community who may not come in other ways. And so, but you create those opportunities again and again and again and have a full, rich way of multiple entryways for people to do that. And supposedly that's one of the things you could do. But the other thing that many of the people who are studying this say, you just got to know your audience. The audience has changed. We can say they're no longer going to attend churches. They're no longer going to do these kinds of stuff. They're interested in many other things, and they're showing up in vast numbers. They're showing up in some places in vast numbers. Now, civic engagement in America has dropped, but they're showing up for more experiential types of things. They'll go to the Science Museum, the Nature Center. Those are still clogged on a given summer. Try to get a ticket to Disneyland anymore. You know, they're doing things that are experientially very, very different without showing up for elections, without participating in the usual social justice drives, without all those kinds of stuff. And sometimes you have to do it, they say, in a very different way that meets those audiences. It's more of experience. In fact, they did that where they created it as a fun way to come together and to potentially meet a potential mate. And sure enough, thousands of people in their 20s show up for those events, right? Because that's what they would do. They want to meet other people and potentially have their life. For me, I had to end with this, is that civic engagement is a spiritual practice, right? For that, I think of it as one of the things that ethical culturists do, is to build authentic, diverse community. The people who are not in the room, the people who the voices were not to. Those are the things that we need to be doing. Because humans as a social creature, we need other people. We need healthy environments. We need to come together, even though we have our differences sometimes and bump heads, and still remain committed and engaged and find works in multiple ways of entry, and always remembering, why aren't they out there, those people out there participating in here, and what more can we do? And I'm very optimistic about that, and I'm just really kind of happy to be here. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Curt, for that thought-provoking and really uplifting. You know, with all those statistics, it would be easy to like sort of say, oh no. But really, I think what you found was, you know, the positive in there, as well as a really good reflection of what our role here is in the Ethical Culture Society. Oh, we have Nina, your hand is raised on Zoom. So I'm not sure if you have...
I think Nina wants to make a comment on Curt's talk.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, is it possible to ask a question?
Curt,
Sure.
Can she ask a question?
Yes.
Please do, Nina.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Curt, for everything that you shared. This was so enlightening. And this is my first Ethical Society meeting. Hi, everyone. I'm Nina. I'm also on the younger side. I'm part of Gen Z that we discussed is having an increase in civic engagement. And I resonate with everything that you all shared about how, you know, generations are changing and adapting to social media, the internet, rising technology. But I had a comment and a question following that comment. One, as a 26-year-old person, I think when it comes to outreach, there's a really big disconnect. A lot of the organizations that I grew up volunteering with when I was in middle school, high school, once I went to college, you know, left my New Jersey suburb and was in the city, when I came back to visit, it was really hard to re-engage. And I just feel like in terms of outreach, there's a lot of really incredible organizations that have capacity to do so much more. They're just not speaking to or reaching my generation the way that we are traditionally reached, which is via social media. So I think there is a lot of appetite, and hopefully next meeting I come in person, but this is case in point. Like I came across this online and it was something I was really interested in, but I joined in virtually first rather than coming in person. But there is an appetite to, you know, engage and build community because, at least from my perspective, we've realized that social media is faux community. At the end of the day, we need each other. So I wonder if there's any data or anything that you've read or come across that points to why there was kind of a disconnect, and people who are traditionally engaged kind of got disillusioned from these organizations. And we talked about politics and social issues, but beyond identity politics, why is it that people are not even knowing their neighbors, not even talking to each other? And this goes way beyond COVID. Like, this preceded COVID, where people weren't really talking to each other and building community like they did before.
Nina, thank you. Those are really, really great questions. You know, historically, the research would say that one thing about Americans, as opposed to other cultures, is we are one of the more highly mobile people in the world. That, you know, people get married, they move to a different city, they get a job, they transfer to another job, they move across country, they move back with this stuff. Whereas in Europe, even, people would tend to stay much longer in their hometowns or their region. We travel. That was historically the reasons given. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is the difference between digital natives, they're called, people like yourself who grew up and being very facile at using internet, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, instant kind of communication, and those of us who are still using printed newsletters, right, and sending out church bulletins and things like that. And that was, they also say, one of the big disconnect and the challenges for people even of my age of remembering to, hey, I need to Facebook us right now all in the room together and send a picture and those kinds of stuff. So learning how to be much better at being an online presence is something we have to overcome, a lot of groups, and get really good at it, because communication and the speed of communication is much quicker today, and people want to participate in those comments right away that social media allows. And we just had to get better at it, which is probably what happened to some of your organizations. They just didn't keep up with the speed there. Thank you for the great question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah, and let me say thank you for attending and showing up, and thank you for raising your hand. That's courageous, I'll say. And we need more courage like that, and we're happy to have your input and thoughts and contributions as to how we can do that outreach better.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.